Again, welcome all to the Uniform Crime Report, Definition of Rape, Updates and New Developments. I'm Sharon Haas from the Sexual Violence Justice Institute. The Institute has worked with multidisciplinary teams for over a decade to play a role in strengthening the ways in which our systems address sexual assault cases in Minnesota and also nationally. We do this through collaboration and leadership and resource development. And I wanted to start off by talking about why this topic of the Uniform Crime Report matters to us. As most of you are now aware, on January 1st this past year, the FBI began collecting sexual assault data using a new definition. And you're going to hear more about that very involved process here today. Related to this, one of the things that has gotten our attention these past few years when hearing about jurisdictions across the country facing investigations related to high levels of unfounded or dropped sexual assault cases is that it seems that all of these jurisdictions had some kind of a functioning SART. And so something that we take away from this is that some of our collaborative work that focuses on protocols and on teams, individual cases, is not sufficient alone. If we don't pay at least a certain amount of attention to what cases, sexual assault cases and dispositions look like as a whole in our jurisdiction, we're likely to miss some critical information. So to quote Carol Tracy, who is, we're happy to have with us today, ultimately, accurate data is a fundamental starting place to improve and monitor police investigations for law enforcement themselves, but also for advocates and analysts of law enforcement practice. So this is one of the things that has motivated us to host this webinar here today, and we're glad to have all of you with us. Thanks for joining us. We've had an overwhelming response to this webinar, and over 500 have signed on to be with us on the presentation itself or to receive a recording of today's presentation. Today's registrations tell us that there are at least 35 U.S. states represented out there amongst the participants, and a host of Navy and other military personnel we'd like to welcome to the webinar. One of the things that we learned from your registrations is that about half, or 49% of you, would describe yourselves as either unfamiliar or not very familiar with the UCR definition change. And then there's another 40% that describe yourselves as somewhat familiar, and it's a smaller 11% that feel pretty familiar, very familiar with the UCR and the change in definition. And so we're hoping to increase your familiarity over the next 90 minutes and to give you some ideas about how to make use of this new knowledge. And with that, I'm very pleased to present to you our presenters at today's webinar. We have with us Shannon Branley and Sunny Snitker, both who are in leadership roles with the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF, which has been very involved with the change in the UCR definition. Shannon is the Deputy Chief of Staff and has been with PERF since 2008, and she's lent her expertise to PERF's work on reporting and investigating sexual assaults. Sunny is a research associate and was a key project team member of PERF's development of the publication Improving the Police Response to Sexual Assault, released in 2012, and has been very involved in their project focused on the UCR definition. We're also very pleased to have joining us Carol Tracy, the director of the Women's Law Project in Philadelphia, and a long-term and tireless advocate for issues that strengthen rights and protections for women. And she has played a central and instrumental role in securing the UCR definition change. And you're going to be hearing, again, more about that in today's presentation. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Sunny Snitker.
Thanks, Sharon. I appreciate that. So I guess before we kind of jump into the presentation today, I wanted to go ahead and tell you a little bit about who we are. And so the Police Executive Research Forum, we're a nonprofit think tank, and we specialize in police issues. Just a few years ago, we partnered with the Women's Law Project in Philadelphia on this specific issue, and I'll let Carol kind of introduce the Women's Law Project in just a moment. PERF is, we're a membership organization made up of law enforcement executives, and we focus on research and policy development. And Carol, did you want to say something about the Women's Law Project?
Sure. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary. We're a public interest law center located in Pennsylvania with offices in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. We do high-impact litigation and public policy analysis and advocacy and community education on a broad range of issues, from reproductive rights to sexual assault and domestic violence, family law reform, gender discrimination in employment, athletics, education. Most recently we've been doing a considerable amount of work in Philadelphia working on reform issues around sexual assault and domestic violence.
All right, great. And just to kind of go over really quickly the session objectives for the webinar today, we're largely going to be going over the work we've been doing on our current project that's funded through the Office on Violence Against Women. It's a cooperative agreement where we're really focused on delivering technical assistance to stop providers, law enforcement, and really working on a few different things. So we'll be working on helping with the implementation of the FBI UCR program definition of rape, the summary reporting system's definition of rape. We'll be kind of discussing some of the work we're doing to mitigate some of the potential impacts of the definition change. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some of the research we've come across through this project on gender-biased policing, and then also some of the promising practices that we're excited to work on with our technical assistance project. And then as a part of this, we'll also be going into a little bit of the background of how we became involved in this issue, and then also what our previous partnership has brought us together to do. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Carol, and she can talk to you a little bit about the Philadelphia story.
Yes. We became involved in this in 1999 when the Philadelphia Inquirer did an investigative series alleging that the Philadelphia Police Department was not investigating about 30% of the sex crimes reported to it, but instead were moving it to a non-criminal category, which meant if there was no crime reported, then there would be no investigation. And it subsequently shielded these crimes from any public scrutiny. Apparently, this practice of putting sex crimes in a non-criminal category, in Philadelphia it was called investigation of persons. And by the way, many jurisdictions do the same thing under a different name, but this in Philadelphia was called investigation of persons. It apparently resulted after the FBI did an audit in 1983 showing that Philadelphia had a 43% unfounded rate for rape. Now, in order for a crime to be unfounded, it has to be investigated, and the investigation has to determine that the report is either false, meaning it never occurred, or baseless, meaning that it does not meet the legal criteria for a crime, but the report itself is not false. Now, when we read this, and we have been working over the years very closely with our Rape Crisis Center, we were all shocked at the report that the Inquirer was in which the Inquirer was making these allegations. So we immediately contacted the police department and wanted to meet with the commissioner and his senior people, recognizing that the department had been meeting with Women Organized Against Rape for the past 20 years, we realized that wasn't enough though, and we asked our City Council Public Safety Committee to have hearings, which as a matter of strategy was probably one of the most important things we did. And we also talked to the Inquirer to see if they were going to continue the coverage, which they did. And I won't go into much more detail than that, but the immediate response was the Commissioner totally eliminated the practice of any sex crimes being put in a non-criminal category. They needed to be investigated, they needed to be founded or unfounded, and no longer were they going to be permitted to be in that category. But we also told the department through City Council that we wanted the cases reinvestigated for the past 5 years to see if there were any cases in which prosecution or arrest could occur. The reinvestigation was done quite transparently and was shocking. Showed that 37% of the cases that had been put in the non-criminal category were first-degree felony rapes, which amounted to 681 cases. Another 48% were founded as other sex crimes. And when the police commissioner realized how serious the problem was, a number of very significant reforms were put in place, including improved supervision, additional detectives, revising their coding manual, and public notice of sexual offenses, because when serial rapes were occurring, they were not publicized either. And this came on the heels of a serial rapist in Philadelphia who murdered a young woman named Shannon Schieber, and he turned out to have been a serial rapist who then moved on to Colorado to continue to rape before he was apprehended. The police commissioner also asked the Women's Law Project to organize an advocate case review, which we have done now every year since 2000 with Women Organized Against Rape and 2 of our child advocacy centers, because our Special Victims Unit also does child sex abuse and physical abuse. Let me turn it back to you, Sunny, for the description of Baltimore.
Sure. Then very similarly, in 2010, the Baltimore Sun discovered that the Baltimore Police Department was classifying rape cases as unfounded at a rate 5 times higher than the national average. So in these cases, in response to this, the police leaders in Baltimore took some action to improve their practices and to address this. Some of those are very similar to what Carol mentioned happened in Philadelphia. They also created an audit committee to review 135 unfounded sexual assault cases. Of those, 71 cases were reclassified and 28 of those to rape. Then they also implemented some law enforcement policy and procedure reforms to better reflect some of the promising practices that we've seen come out of other cities such as Philadelphia. They found some funding and were able to improve some other aspects, including they hired a full-time START coordinator. They coordinated a public outreach campaign that was called Rape Is Not Your Fault. They also were able to get a funded, dedicated victim advocate to work with police. They had video equipment installed to record victim and suspect interviews. They were able to promote some information sharing through some investments in software, and that included some accountability across the different justice agencies. They also were able to outsource some of the backlogged rape kits, and then they invested heavily in training for the investigations unit, the sex offense investigations unit. And so we'll kind of move on from there and talk a little bit about the UCR. Carol?
Yes. So while we were learning about how crimes were coded, it immediately took us to the Uniform Crime Report, which is housed in the FBI. And just a little bit of background on that. It was created back in the 1920s by the International Association of Chiefs of Police to track national crime statistics. It's a voluntary system. Over 17,000 police jurisdictions in the United States participate in it. And it collects data on known offenses and on persons arrested by police departments. It does not contain data about prosecution or judicial proceedings. This is just about the police. And the FBI is the national clearinghouse for statistical information on crime. The UCR has categorized crime in two ways. Part 1 crimes were murder and non-negligent manslaughter, forcible rape, and we will go into that in more detail in a minute, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. The Part 2 crimes were reported only when an arrest has been made. The Part 1 crime data is published each year in the crime in the United States. Typically, jurisdictions report to their state, and their state reports to the FBI. So as we were learning about crimes coding, we learned that the FBI definition of rape was inadequate. In our conversations with the Philadelphia Police Department, we would be referring to Pennsylvania's crimes codes that included rape of men, digital, oral, and anal rape, and non-forcible rape in accordance with our crimes code. But we learned that they were reporting publicly and to the FBI cases that only covered one of our crimes codes, which was male-female vaginal penile penetration by force. That's what the FBI definition of it was, and that was the only report that was publicly available. And even our Philadelphia Police Department agreed that this was an inadequate statistical representation of serious sex crimes, and they helped us to learn about the UCR and to request changes. So as a result, we prepared a letter to the FBI requesting that the definition be changed. And in doing so, we enlisted support from sexual assault and domestic violence coalitions and other local and national organizations throughout the country, and submitted the letter to the FBI on behalf of over 80 such organizations. Now, this letter was literally ready to be mailed on 9/11/2001. We waited several weeks before we mailed it, as our nation's attention was clearly directed to the tragedy of 9/11, and we didn't hear anything about it. Although it turns out we subsequently learned that they did review our letter and decided that they did not want to change it. That moves us to 2010. During that decade, we were getting calls from journalists in many other cities reporting that basically that there was a chronic and systemic failure of police to accept complaints, to investigate sex crimes, and to either unfound them at a very high rate or do what Philadelphia did, put them in a non-criminal category. We also got involved in doing an amicus curiae brief on behalf of a young woman in western Pennsylvania in a civil rights suit that occurred after her rapist had been apprehended, but after she had been arrested for making a false report. So we realized that we had become an inadvertent repository of some very serious police practices involving rape and other sex crimes. And our senator at the time, one of our senators, Arlen Specter, was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime. And we asked him to have hearings on this subject, which he did. And at that time, we reintroduced the issue of the inadequacy of the FBI definition. Now, what followed that was a series of meetings with the FBI that ultimately led to the change from the historic definition of carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will to the updated definition of penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. the Office of Violence Against Women joined us and played a major role. And in fact, the definition was theirs. We had a slightly different definition, but this when we wrote the letter in 2001, but we completely concurred with this as actually being more important. Sunny?
Sure. So during the Senate Judiciary Committee, another kind of important player who was invested in this issue and presenting to Congress is Philadelphia Police Commissioner and PERF President Charles Ramsey. Around that time, the Commissioner announced that PERF would be partnering with the Women's Law Project to explore issues around the police response to sexual assault. So on September 23rd of 2011, PERF hosted a national conference of police executives, advocates, academics, and journalists to discuss a few things, namely improving the police response to sexual assault, and then also to look at changing the UCR definition of rape. So one of the important kind of lead-up research pieces that we did before this conference is that we surveyed our PERF membership regarding the different policies and practices, but then also importantly, we surveyed them on what impacts they would feel or they would see were the UCR summary reporting system definition of rape to be expanded. And one of the most important and notable findings of the survey is that roughly 80% of respondents did not believe that the historic definition was adequate. And this was very important because for quite some time that had been a concern that police might not be receptive to a definition change, or that it wouldn't go over very well. And so we were, through this survey and through the discussion, police executives were able to really voice their concerns about the historic definition of rape. All right. So that kind of led into our current project with the Women's Law Project. So shortly following our meeting, and as Carol mentioned, after the work of countless individuals to get this definition changed, the Women's Law Project and PERF, we worked together to go to the Office on Violence Against Women because we wanted to help with the implementation. Importantly, as Sharon mentioned in the quote from Carol earlier, accurate data is critical to improving how we respond to sexual assault. So we wanted to make sure that the implementation was going well and that we were offering as much technical assistance as possible. Additionally, through our current cooperative agreement with OVW, we're focusing on providing technical assistance to 4 police departments to develop and implement promising practices for reporting, investigating, and ensuring quality assurance in sexual assault cases. So in addition to kind of providing ongoing technical assistance, we'll also be partnering to produce a national publication and a national conference on the issue to present our findings and to talk about implementing the definition and also implementing some of these promising practices. Okay. So one of the things we wanted to talk about in this project is that there are definitely going to be some serious impacts with this change. Carol?
Okay. And the most significant impact will be the increase in the number of reported rapes to the UCR, because it's now going to be covering, in most states, 2 or 3 or more crimes codes. I know in Philadelphia there's been an increase by about 30%. And because they've been collecting it for a full year now. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's been an increase in the actual incidence of these crimes, but it does suggest that there's a clear, much better reporting on the prevalence so that the community knows more about how commonplace these sex crimes are. And it's important for us to understand that data drives policy, and for people to know that some funding decisions to law enforcement are made using UCR data. Now, I noticed on the forms that were sent to INCASA, a number of advocates have asked about how this is going to impact how they help with their clients. And I think as Sharon spoke about this earlier, and it was certainly true with our experiences in Philadelphia. I mean, Women Organized Against Rape had a good relationship with the police department, and even at the height of the scandal in Philadelphia, there were certainly police officers who were doing appropriate investigations. So this is a metric. It's not the only metric, but it is a metric to help us understand what the police are doing with the crimes that come into them. And it's also a metric to help us as advocates if we think that there are not enough police assigned to investigate these crimes. Now, you know, according to that FBI index that I recited earlier, rape is the #2 most serious crime, only next to murder in severity. And we don't have, even now, a good sense of how resources are directed in the police department to really respond to this. I would also add that I don't think we know that about prosecution either, but this is about police. So this is a metric that helps us evaluate police performance. And it's also important for us as advocates, I think, to realize, because we know, or you all know better than anyone, that the vast majority of rape victims don't report it to law enforcement. So for those who do, it's really important for us to know how to measure police performance. And as you might imagine, along with the dumping of these sex crimes, the practice in Philadelphia, the treatment of rape victims was, in many cases, terrible. And as I said, in some cases very good, but frequently victims were interrogated, not interviewed, threatened with lie detector tests, threatened with arrests, more concern shown for the perpetrator's reputation than for the victim, those kinds of things. So the data gives us a more objective handle on this interaction. And we also know that there is research that shows us the interaction with the police will have a significant impact both on whether the victim will stay involved in law enforcement, but also on the victim's ongoing mental health. So understanding local data is a very important metric here. At the same time, the police themselves are very worried about what the public response is going to be in each community when there's a 20 to 30% uptick. And some of the attachments you have about helping you learn how to follow data with the FBI and or with your own state police, I think can help you help the police report this or explain this to the community. The police have also told us that they need more public policy updates and training on this themselves, and there was, in some cases, some significant technology changes that were needed to comply. We didn't have too much of a problem here in Philadelphia, but there are some jurisdictions that still do things by hand. There, as you know, there are many, many small jurisdictions. So that it will take a little while for all of this to flesh itself out. But the FBI has been providing, and so has PERF, which Sunny will talk about now, more information on how to report it and assistance if issues come up about how to communicate it to the public.
Great. And so as Carol mentioned, the folks at the FBI at the UCR program have been really helpful with helping us develop the FAQ document about the definition change, which I believe was sent with your information this morning with registration for this. And that document really includes a lot of the more technical information about how to report using the new definition, how to find out if your state is reporting using the new definition. And that does bring up an important point, and that's that not all law enforcement agencies will be reporting for 2013 using the new definition. As Carol mentioned, there are certainly going to be some challenges, software updates, things like that, with how the information is being recorded. I think it was with our last meeting with the UCR folks, they were estimating around 45 or 46% of law enforcement agencies who reported to the UCR program last year will be reporting using the new definition in 2013. Now, the UCR program does plan to publish both the historical and newly defined rape counts in their Crime in the United States report for 2013 and in future years. But there may be some slight changes, but the plan going forward is to report both numbers so that it will be easier to differentiate which agencies are reporting using which definition. So another aspect to this is that not all agencies, first, these programs are entirely voluntary, but agencies may also report using the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Now, NIBRS is another voluntary reporting system that collects national crime statistics. Now, NIBRS allows for more information to be collected and reported on each individual incident. And this information, the definition for rape for agencies reporting via the NIBRS, has changed only very slightly since the NIBRS program had more categories that could be reported. And so agencies and states that are reporting using NIBRS, their numbers will be calculated and reflected in the Crime in the United States report. And just to hit a little bit more on what Carol was talking about with some of the challenges to law enforcement moving forward, another finding in our survey from 2011 on kind of moving forward, if the definition were to be changed, what would need to happen in police agencies to comply with the new definition. And largely what we saw, as you may see on the screen, are the departments would need to have training for their reporting personnel. They might need technology updates or hardware or software updates and a few policy and procedure changes. So it's, we anticipate that as the next few years roll out, that far more agencies will be reporting using the expanded definition of rape for the summary reporting system, because those are challenges that they can certainly meet.
Okay. The another interesting thing that's happened in the past several years is the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. They are called upon with some frequency to investigate police misconduct. And traditionally, those investigations have looked at excessive use of force and profiling. But in, I think, 2011, or maybe it was 2012, the police were asked to, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division was asked by the then mayor of New Orleans to come and do an investigation of the police department, and part of it was in response to Katrina. Actually, the request was made several years earlier. The report was issued later. And in doing so, they did the traditional report, but they also, for the first time, as far as I know, and as far as anyone I know knows, they also looked at gender bias policing in sexual assault and domestic violence cases. And in New Orleans, they saw some improvements in domestic violence, but they saw the same kind of issues in sexual assault cases. There was also a very aggressive reporter for the Times-Picayune who was also reporting on the police department's failure to investigate sex crimes. So since that time, there have been two other cases where the Department of Justice has investigated police departments. One is in Puerto Rico, and that was a full-blown investigation, and the other was in Missoula, Montana, which focused quite significantly or completely on sexual assault, and that also was involving campus sexual assault. The authority that the Department of Justice has to do this is under the police misconduct provision enacted in 1994 that makes it unlawful for state or local law enforcement officers to engage in a pattern or practice of conduct that deprives persons of rights protected by the Constitution or laws. So this has also sent a very, very strong signal to police departments that it's very important for them to look at their own practices. And we certainly saw that in the PERF conference that Sonny spoke about. They had to shut down registration at something like 155 people for a forum that they expected 70 or 80 at most to come to. So it suggested to us that the police themselves and the police leadership who attended that conference were very forthcoming, actually, in recognizing that these crimes have been under-investigated, and also in recognizing that very frequently perpetrators of sex crimes are serial perpetrators. And as serial perpetrators, they not only rape, but they also go on to murder. And there are certainly many, many national cases that support that. And I think it's creating something of a paradigm shift in the way the police investigate crimes. So some of the warning signs for you to look at, and I would also suggest, to the extent people can, if there are local colleges or universities in your community, to try to partner with criminologists who are much more experienced in dealing with UCR data. But my colleague here, Terry Fromson, our managing attorney, she and I have done this work together. We've learned it. So it's, and the UCR website actually has a lot of information on it, and the UCR handbook describes and gives lots of examples on how the program should be conducted. So one of the most glaring indicators is if there are more homicides than rapes reported to the UCR. And that was happening in New Orleans, and that was happening in Baltimore. If there's a very, very high percentage of unfounded rape complaints, Kim Lonsway has done a report that shows that studies suggest that the percentage of rape claims that are false is somewhere between 2 and 8%. The FBI reports puts the number of unfounded rape complaints at 4.8% in 2011, and that was the most current available. The average rate of unfounded reports for violent crimes is 1.2, and for property crimes, 1%. We've talked to criminologists as we had been doing all of this work, and there hasn't been as much research as one would hope on UCR rape data because of the clear recognition of the inadequacy of it because of the limitation of the definition. So with this expanded definition, one hopes that we will get more academic literature as well to help guide us in this. And of course, there's always the pattern of complaints over time from sexual assault victims. What Women Organized Against Rape reported when they testified before City Council is that victims would call and Women Organized Against Rape would call just to find out what was happening. And when they wouldn't get answers after a period of time, they'd just give up. They didn't know, and the victims didn't know that their cases had been taken from a report to a non-investigation to a non-crime. That was never made public. No one understood it. It just sort of fell into bureaucratic limbo. So it's really very important to listen to people if they're saying they're not getting back to me, I don't know what's going on with my case, and at least coming to some closure. The cases should be founded or unfounded. And the other thing we haven't talked about a lot here is that the FBI also keeps data on clearance rates. And the clearance rates mean where that was the case, if it was founded, was it cleared by arrest, or was it exceptionally cleared? And the issue of exceptional clearance is one that's getting a lot of research attention right now because a significant number of cases seem to be cleared exceptionally. And in order to clear by exceptional means, according to the UCR data, the investigation definitely had to establish the identity of the offender. There had to be enough information to support an arrest, charge, and turning over to court for prosecution. The location of the offender needed to be known. But if there was some reason outside of law enforcement control that precludes arresting, charging, or prosecuting the offender, it can be exceptionally cleared. Sometimes that is that the individual, the victim, says, I do not want to go forward. I absolutely do not want to go forward. The other issues may be the police and prosecution decide that this is a case that they simply cannot, they don't have any possibility of winning at prosecution. Now, I think part of what is being looked at by advocates and academics is whether that bar is too high, and that's something I think for all of us to discuss in the future. The warning signs don't always indicate a problem. In small agencies who report relatively few incidents of sexual assault, the statistical measures may not really apply or mean much. And in Philadelphia, we found our unfounded rate at the height of this scandal was very low, and our arrest rate was very high. So in looking at that, it would appear that things were okay. But it's because they just eliminated so many cases that their arrest rate looked better, and they learned from their previous bad practice that they couldn't unfound at the rate they had been because the FBI audit would catch them in doing it. So I think there are some promising practices that we've looked at, and Sunny's going to spend some time talking about that.
Sure. So in our research to this point, between the different cases that we've seen with focuses of gender bias from the Department of Justice, and then also in some of the the cities that have experienced these exposés and have worked to improve their practices, there are definitely some common threads. Those certainly include clear and detailed policies and procedures. One of the things we found in our survey back in 2011 is that the vast majority of departments, no matter the size of the agency or the jurisdiction, have policies and procedures on the books specifically for responding to sexual assaults, both for first responders and for investigators. But that doesn't really account for the quality and the applicableness of those policies and procedures. So it's important to make sure that those are very clear, they're detailed, they include the most up-to-date and appropriate information for that department. It's also important that patrol officers are required to write reports for all sex offense calls. So as Carol mentioned in Philadelphia, I think, Carol, did you say it was investigations of persons?
Yes.
How they were classifying some of the reports that were coming into agencies. And so it's very important that if a call comes in through 911 or through dispatch that could be potentially a sexual assault call, that it's written as a report and that it has a full report that comes out through that. That was certainly also something that they saw in Baltimore. Then definitely investing in quality specialized training for detectives and for first responders. Supervisory review of unfounded cases and complaints that are coded to non-criminal categories such as the investigations of persons. And then active participation in a SART. As all of you know, SARTs take many different forms and have different levels of participation. But many of the cities that did kind of go ahead and implement some of these reforms used their SARTs in implementing this to better tailor their reforms and their practices to their city and to their specific agency. And then also the use of an audit mechanism for sex offense cases. So it's very important that police agencies and where appropriate and where acceptable outside agencies are auditing these cases to make sure that they're receiving the proper attention. And then the tracking of the disposition of these investigations. So as Carol mentioned, how is the case closed? How is it cleared? So these are kind of some of the promising practices that have come out of our research so far. We're just getting into year 2 of this 3-year project. And we're very excited to begin working with the technical assistance agencies and to continue working with the folks at the UCR program to work on the implementation of the definition and to help with the rollout of that. And one thing I did want to mention that the cities that will be working with the agencies have not been formally selected yet. We're moving into selection phase, so we don't have those ready for you today. But I think we're getting close to question time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And possibly we have a number of questions that have come in, a handful of questions. But if there are other questions that participants would like to raise, please include those in the chat bar, and we will try to get to those. One place that we might want to start, if we move just back to the previous slide, there was a question about the promising practices in sexual assault investigations, and that was whether or not there was a source document for those points, or if those promising practices came from a number of different sources. That was a question that was raised in terms of the promising practices mentioned here. And maybe, Sunny, would you, should I go?
Sure. So this list has been pulled together from a number of sources. However, many of these practices are highlighted in our 2012 publication, Improving the Police Response to Sexual Assault. And that can be accessed on PERF's website. And we can make sure that we have a link that goes out to everybody to that. But it's www.policeforum.org. And then we have a free docs library that includes information on this.
Great. Thanks very much. And we'll move to the next questions, but before we do this, I want to make sure that people are aware that we want to express our appreciation to the Office on Violence Against Women that has supported this presentation here today through financial support. And so moving to another question, there was a question raised about does the definition support just females or both male and females, meaning forcible rape of a woman by a man and of a man by a woman?
This is Carol. The definition is totally gender neutral, and it's also important to note that it does not require force. Many of our states have statutes, Pennsylvania is one of them, that has a non-forcible statute, meaning no means no. It does not require force. So that's important to recognize, but it is gender neutral, male to male, female to male, female to female. And remember, one of the things when this was going on, we got a lot of congratulations from people thanking us for changing the law. We didn't change the law. All we did was change how data was collected based on existing law. So I just want to restate that in case there is anyone who has any lingering confusion about that.
Great. Thanks very much, Carol. There was a question raised by Olivia, and I believe this goes to Sunny and to Shannon related to PERF technical assistance work. There was a question about who are the 4 departments? What are the 4 departments that were mentioned earlier? And if that's not what the question refers to, feel free to chat in, Olivia.
So we're actually in the phases of selecting the 4 departments right now. So we actually don't have the names of those departments currently, but as I mentioned, we're still at the beginning of our technical assistance project, and that'll be continuing as we move on. If you have any suggestions, or if there are departments that you think that we should look at, or if there are specific technical assistance requests, they're certainly welcome to contact Shannon or myself.
Great, thanks very much. Another question in relationship to the UCR reporting: does uniform crime reporting data differentiate between sexual assault involving child victims versus adult victims?
This is Carol. Incest is not included, I believe, but sexual assault of children from non-family members is included in the data. I will double check on that. And again, although sexual assault of children is a crime in all states, but I will double check on that to clarify that.
Great.
And Carol, I believe we have a response from the FBI on that question in the FAQ document that went out earlier today. I believe there's a response on how that's going to be handled using the new definition as well. Okay.
If that's not sufficient, then we'll get you further information.
And the document that Sunny is referring to is frequently asked questions about the change in the UCR definition of rape that was attached in the reminder email that all of you hopefully have received. Other questions? There's a question. One of the points that was raised by Jennifer is I think it's important to make the point again that unfounded complaints include both false and baseless claims. The warning sign slide seems to confound these issues, although it was mentioned earlier. would you want? Is there any comment to that in terms of the comment from Jennifer? Is that Carol?
Yeah. Well, the UCR does not differentiate. We don't have a separate category that says this, 40 of the complaints were false and 23 were baseless. It's all in one category. But a baseless complaint means that someone came in and said that she or he was raped, but nothing that they described indicated that they were raped. It may be they may say someone touched a body part but didn't penetrate it. Well, no, that would be another crime. It's when there's just no crime that's been committed. A false complaint is that someone has made an allegation that upon investigation the police determine is a false complaint. Some of them are in the categories of recantations, and again, this is also an issue where there is a lot of discussion about whether recantations should be unfounded. Were recantations in some ways coerced? Is it a kind of case where a person, this case should be left as an open case without prejudice? But there's in the advocacy and academic community, there's a lot of discussion about how recantations should be categorized. And again, they are not, there's no data either locally or with the FBI that differentiates among any of these kinds of crimes. I'm realizing a case might be of statutory rape for a baseless crime. Someone might come in, usually a parent, and complain that a daughter or son had been statutorily raped, and it turns out that according to that state's crimes code, the ages were not appropriate, so that it was simply not a sex crime. I hope that clarifies it.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Carol. There was another question from Jennifer, and it's, can you explain why the UCR rape statistics for Washington State dropped from about 2,000 in 2011 and previous years to around 600 in 2012? That seems like an odd, or that seems odd is a comment from Jennifer. Carol, do you have comments or?
No, I think it's something that one has to look into. That's an unusual drop, and one of the things sometimes, although, was this for the entire state?
She mentioned Washington State, correct.
I guess one would want to look at what the unfounded rate is there. But the reality is the data people in state police departments are data people. And it has been my experience that they are very willing to talk to you. Mm-hmm. So a question about why this has happened. I mean, most of these problems have been uncovered by investigative reporters in very adversarial contexts. And I think that what we want to be able to do is, well, first of all, I don't think we can rely on investigative reporters in every jurisdiction. So as advocates, I think that part of the way you start it is by talking to the people who collect the data, to ask them if they could explain it to you. And to the extent that you might also enlist the help of a criminologist from a local university, who again have been very helpful to us. And sometimes it's just, a telephone conversation to help assist there. I think that might give you a clue, because that kind of sharp decline is very, very dramatic. So it really begs some questions.
Yeah, I would also add that it's important to remember that the UCR program is voluntary. There have been examples in the past where cities may or agencies may have been reporting to the UCR for rape, and they may, I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, so using the historical definition of rape, certain agencies may choose not to report their numbers to the UCR. They will still publicly make them available to their state UCR program or statistics kind of repository, and they may make them available on their website or to anyone who calls. But if their computer system, for example, didn't allow them to separate out male and female victims prior to this year, then they may not have been able to report to the UCR that specific number. So it could also be an issue of reporting, or they found that they were sending in reports that didn't meet the old definition. So there are a few things that could be going on, but I echo Carol's sentiment. Certainly I would recommend giving them a call. And,
it could be that a major jurisdiction didn't report. Usually, part of the FBI's responsibility is also to assess the validity of the data that comes in. Now, so on occasion, their analysts will look to see if there's a dramatic change because they trend the data. And one of as they move forward, part of the reason they are still going to collect the historic data as well as the aggregate data of all of the sex crimes is so that they can maintain the trending they've had, at least for that one specific kind of rape. So if they see through the trends something dramatically different, if they have the resources, they may question it. But for people who really want to know more about how to use this, I would suggest that perhaps the coalitions get in touch with their state data people and ask for presentations on how they collect the data and where they see the problems. Because as I said, here in Philadelphia, although we were in a pretty adversarial relationship with the police when this first started, there was absolutely complete agreement when we said to them, this reporting of just this one crime doesn't make any sense. And they said, we agree with you. We absolutely agree with you, but this is what the FBI asks for, and this is what you need to do to get it changed. So they were actually quite open to that. Sort of the data people and the investigative people, certainly in large jurisdictions, aren't even in the same building.
Great, thanks very much, Carol and Sunny. There was a question about timing of the UCR data from Deborah. I know the UCR is quite delayed in being released to the public in relationship to 2014 data. When is that anticipated? Is mid-2014 reasonable, or when might we expect the 2013 data? Maybe this is a Sunny question.
Sure, that's a great question, and I'm not sure that the UCR folks have released an anticipated date. In past years, it's been roughly June, July when they've released the draft report for crime in the United States. I would recommend if you have a specific agency or state that you're interested in. Many of the states submit UCR data for all of the law enforcement agencies reporting to the FBI. So I would recommend even calling your state UCR program or state law enforcement kind of statistics program to see if they have specific information that they could help you with in the meantime. And we'll also be touching base with our points of contact at the UCR program here in the next few weeks, they have a busy time ahead of them right now trying to compile all of this information. But if we can get any information on an estimated time frame for the 2013 report, we'll certainly share that information.
Great, thanks. And I think there's another one for you, Sunny. Can you expand on the findings that many agencies have a policy in place, and what that's based on?
Oh, sure. So when I mentioned that earlier, that was based on the 2011 survey that PERF did of our members. And what we asked was basically, do you have a policy for responding to sexual assault for different responding personnel? So that may include dispatch, and then we would ask, do you have a policy for the first responding officer or for the investigative unit? And the results of that survey can also be found in that 2012 document that I mentioned earlier, the specific results. So it was a survey of roughly 300 departments. But it's important to note, in that survey, we were mainly asking, it was very exploratory. As Carol mentioned, there's very limited data on exactly how police departments are responding, what their policies and procedures look like in practice. And so we were mainly asking to say, hey, look, do you have a specific policy for this? So it doesn't necessarily reflect that it's a policy that's written with a good amount of detail or that is tailored specifically to one crime. So that's hopefully what they were responding with. But certainly it's slightly open to interpretation. But we wanted to kind of get a gauge of where departments are on this. And we found that most departments did have policies related to special victims units, to how a dispatcher should respond to a call coming in for sexual assault, and same with first responding officers. And actually we were able to collect some policies and trainings that we're kind of working through to kind of call some information and some trends on those policies. So we're working on that now as well.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Sunny. Question from Barbara is, how do these changes affect universities? Is this a question I can direct to you, Carol?
I think so. And this is not a Clery report where universities just need to report, anyone who works in the university needs to report any incident that's reported to them. So even though many universities have their own police departments, if the police department is authorized to make an arrest, and I think very few are, then they would have to comply with other, again, as long as it's voluntary, submission to the UCR. But this is quite different from the Clery report that requires them just to report anonymous incidents. These are known offenses, investigations, determinations, and as far as I know, for a report to get into the criminal system, the local police maintain jurisdiction over that. There may be some universities where that's not true, but I think for the most part it is. And then it would be reported as the crime is determined, as it's consistent with other crime reports.
Great, thanks. Carol, another one for you. How do you deal with the confidentiality issues with outside auditing of sexual assault cases? So that
yes, we signed an agreement. We don't have an open records law in Pennsylvania. Some states do, I believe. But the only police report that is public is the police incident report. The investigative file is not, so we sign an agreement, that we take no information away from the audit that we do. We sit and go through files. We make notes on the files that are problematic. The police supervisors come in and we go over the notes and we go over the file with them. The notes disappear at the end of the day. They are destroyed. So there's utter confidentiality associated with it. That's an agreement that we've made with the police under those circumstances.
Great. And a question from Shannon about how this changes how sexual assault is reported. And the comment is, rape is rape. Why should the definition change the way that it is reported? How does the definition impact that?
Well, the problem is that the old definition, under the old definition, rape wasn't rape. Only one kind of rape was reported. So this, the rape, anal, oral, digital rape is reported. Non-forcible rape is reported, as long as the state statute covers non-forcible rape. And rape of men is reported, or rape of men by women or female to female. All of that is reported. And it had never, though there were existing state crimes that made it a crime, it was not, the data was not reported to the FBI. Only male, female, vaginal, penal, by force was reported to the FBI and then to the public at large.
Great, thanks. And then in terms of, there's a question as far as kind of the timing of this rollout and how it's going to happen. The definition is effective as of January 1st. Is this something that we're still working on getting up to speed?
Sure. So the definition is effective January 1st, meaning that the FBI's summary reporting system is now able to collect information using the new definition. So there are still agencies and states that are working to get up to speed because of some of the challenges we discussed earlier, needs to update their software or training or policies. There are a few states that are still working towards of using this new definition of rape. But it's looking like it's going to be a little less than 50% of agencies that report to the UCR program that will be using the new definition. So it's going to be a process. This is the first year that they're implementing this, and the first year that we'll see the new data alongside the historical data. So this is the first step in a process, but they're going to, the new information that is reported this year to the UCR will be in the Crime in the United States report.
Great, thanks. Question related to the UCR definition and the military.
The military doesn't report to the UCR. They keep their own data.
Okay, so no military data is included in the UCR numbers and reports?
No.
Okay.
Not unless it's reported to local or state law enforcement and handled externally.
Okay. Question for Shirley. In the PERF research, had you found a difference in law enforcement treatment of child sexual assault versus adult victim sexual assault? Was there anything in the PERF research about that?
Shirley, that's a good question.
Could I take a shot at that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think that many cities have children's alliances, and a children's alliance works with the Child Welfare Agency because these are also child welfare and child abuse investigations about particularly if a family member is involved. It's not just about the prosecution of a crime, but it's also whether or not the child continues to live in that family or what other child welfare services or interventions are necessary. So the Children's Alliances are just amazing programs that probably many people on this call know about and work with, where they do forensic interviews of the children so that the child isn't interviewed by child welfare one day, the police the next day, the prosecutor the next day, then back for second or third interviews. That's just very traumatic for the child, and also any change in their testimony may impact an ultimate prosecution. So they have forensic interviewers. And what we've seen in Philadelphia is the child welfare agencies and the Children's Alliances have been able to develop really good training and interviewing techniques for the children, but it has also, because they have more resources to do it, frankly. They have more financial resources to do it. And I think a lot of that training has spilled over to the line staff. Although there's dedicated special victims detectives and investigators that do child abuse cases, sometimes other line officers get those cases. So they've all been available for training. So I think when there's a child advocacy unit, it improves the response both to children and to adults. I think it's a model practice, and it provides more resources for the kids. What we've seen, and I think it's another area that people are talking about a lot, is how the teenagers are treated. And the person who's most commonly going to be raped is a teenager. And I think the police are a little less reluctant to treat them as children, and to have the kind of advocates available that are available through Child Welfare and Children's Alliance. But that's a kind of convoluted answer. But I think, I can't imagine if there's a child advocacy unit that the rape crisis centers are also not connected to them in some way, because they have more resources in many cases than a lot of the rape crisis centers, and they do really good work for kids that I think helps with adults.
Great, thank you, Carol. There's another question that I think I'll direct to you as well, Carol. The UCR definition was geared to be implemented in September 2001, and you've touched on this some in what you presented, but the delay happened, or there was a delay until 2010. How was this able to happen for nearly a decade of delay?
Well, nothing happened. We wrote our letter to the FBI. We didn't get a response. We thought they're just not paying attention to us. They didn't care much about it. And when I asked the Senate to have, it was very well broadcast among all of the coalitions, because they all signed on to it, at least the initial request. So nothing went on. Quite frankly, between 2001 and 2010, when we had the Senate hearings, recognizing that the Senate Judiciary Committee has virtually no authority, or very little authority over, the federal government has very little authority over what police jurisdictions do. The federal angle that we were able to use was to say, you've got to look at the UCR definition. Once that happened, things moved very quickly. And we went through, and I didn't go into detail about this, but the FBI has, the Uniform Crime Program has a lot of different working groups that evaluate on an ongoing basis their reporting systems. So we went to the working groups along with Ben-Sue Carbon, who was at OVW, and all of the different working groups from different regions around the country looked at whether or not the UCR definition should be updated. And most of them agreed that it should. And then there were two other steps. So it took a year and a half of intensive meetings around getting the definition changed. That involved the police chiefs and the police data people from all over the country.
Great, thanks. Question from Kathy. Can you discuss the implications about the variety of reasons why a case is not charged or referred to prosecution? For example, victims who don't cooperate or choose not to prosecute. Are these also categorized as unfounded, or?
No, they're exceptionally cleared. If there's enough evidence to believe that a crime has occurred and a perpetrator has been identified, but the witness does not want to cooperate, you know, there are cases where a prosecutor can still move forward if they've got enough additional evidence. But in rape cases, for the most part, you need the testimony of the victim. If the victim does not want to go forward, then it's a founded case, but it is exceptionally cleared.
Great, thanks. There was a question from Christopher about what your sense is of how the UCR data is impacted by the fact that the military's data is not included in it.
Well, you know, 17,000 police jurisdictions are included in it, and the military have been reporting their own data. So I think the data is available, and I don't know if any researchers are putting it together, because you know some sexual assaults are occurring in the military outside the United States, and the military keeps its own data. So I guess the question is, should the military be reporting to the UCR? And I haven't really thought about that. It could be that they should as well. I don't know if it would be a separate category or what.
Thanks. And then the question from Scott is, how is the data being collected being used to make a change or allocate efforts to combat the crime of sexual assault? And that's the big question of how are we going to use this?
Yes.
Shannon, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. This is Shannon Brandley from PERF. So this data is important, and Carol, feel free to chime in on this. The data is important because this is what we use to allocate funds. This is how police departments can get money, and you know, advocacy groups can get money and provide those supports to victims, because you need to know, you know, what the extent of the problem is and what the different characteristics of the problem are. So having, you know, this information gives you a better understanding of what the problem is, so you can find the solutions to address those problems.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we disclosed this in 2001, there was interest, but the public's interest in all of around rape and sexual assault, I think, has changed pretty dramatically in the last decade. And I think that both police departments and the public at large are primed to take it more seriously. When we see the complaints that are coming out and the advocacy and organization on college campuses and the military, it suggests to me that there is more public interest in addressing this that is as commensurate or more commensurate with the severity of this crime than was seen in the past, and that we have a broader range of stakeholders interested in it, and it's not just advocates and rape crisis, that there's a broader community. But I think that it's really important to keep the pressure up and to keep asking the questions. You know, as I said, talking to the state people, when they get a couple of calls to say, we want you to come make a presentation to our coalition about how you collect the data, how you interpret the data, and what you think you do once you have this data, that's a question that hasn't been asked before. And it will require a response. And you know, I think that we all have to figure out the best way to stay active in looking at all of this. I mean, there's lots of data in Pennsylvania that I think is very problematic. I've focused mostly on Philadelphia. I mean, it's a huge jurisdiction. There are over 5,000 cases a year that are coming in. But I feel personally that we need to be more aggressive in looking at what's going on in the rest of our state, and not wait for an investigative reporter to do it. You know, just to do it as part of our regular day-to-day work in trying to advance better responses to this issue. But I do feel like there's been a paradigm shift. And it is our responsibility to just keep the momentum going.
Absolutely, and we're getting very close on our time here, so that might be a good place to wrap things up. I would just mention that appreciate the comment from Ruby about mentioning victims as uncooperative. Reflects negatively on victims, and so for various reasons, victims not participating in cases is not necessarily a case of uncooperative. So appreciate that. We're just getting to about 1:30, and I hope we've covered most questions. There were a few questions about the UCR reports themselves and how often are they available, and there's information in your handouts about where that information is available and how to access that. And there's an annual report of compiled UCR data that's available in the information in your handouts. And we're getting to 1:30, so just want to express our appreciation for our presenters, Shannon Branley, Sunny Schnicker, and Carol Tracy, for lending your expertise here and responding to participant questions. You will receive a link to the recording of this presentation that you'll be able to access and view at a later date. And there's information in your materials that includes contact information for us here, for myself at the Sexual Violence Justice Institute, and there's also contact information in the presentation for our presenters. So with that, just want to thank you very much, the three of you, for the presentation today.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.